Thanks, John. So I thought I would start out by telling you a little story about procrastination. How many of you are procrastinators in this room, like me? Anybody? I know there's more than two. Maybe you're procrastinating and raising your hand right now. I'm a notorious procrastinator, and one of my New Year's resolutions this year was I am not going to procrastinate anymore. And I am notorious for sending in my conference presentations really, really late. And I think this is my clicker. Yes. I think this is the last clicker. Jens, I think I left my. Thank you. Not procrastinating. I'm taking my clicker up to the stage. Thank you so much. So I was really proud of myself. I got the notification from MRMW that I was going to be speaking at this event. I was very excited because we had just released a new platform, a new white paper on cross-platform survey research. I was very excited to present it. I did my presentation on time. I sent it in. Jasper emailed me back and said it was approved. And then about 2 weeks ago, I went on to the website to book my hotel. Amazingly, it was completely full. And then just happened to look at the agenda to see when I was presenting and noticed that the topic was not the topic that I'd actually written my presentation on because I had submitted 2 topics. And the topic that was accepted was not the one I was presenting on today or had written the presentation for. So little lesson to read the fine print on the acceptance. I was relaying this story to a friend of mine in Atlanta, and Mark, you might have heard this term before, but she said, you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest right now. And I think that was true with the creation of this presentation. The good news is that even though I'm not going to be talking about the results of the white paper we recently released, it does have sort of an additive effect on this presentation, because what we find when we're working with clients and we're talking about bringing all these different types of data together is that cross-platform research is really, for many people, the first step. So for many researchers, you're starting to experiment with doing surveys across multiple devices. So maybe not even focus so much on mobile, but just making sure that your surveys are accessible for someone coming in on any device. And so cross-platform is sort of the first step in that. And then what we start doing is looking at what are these other forms of more passively collected data out there that we can add in to create a more holistic view of what's going on with a brand. So cross-platform is a really important part of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to just briefly touch on just a few key things that came out of that cross-platform study. Obviously, if you want to see the entire white paper, you can download it from our website or run up to me later, and I'm happy to share it with you. But the cross-platform, again, is really important. And I think we've seen a couple of things presented today. I know Ryan talked a lot about what they're doing at General Mills and sort of what people are willing to do on their mobile devices. And I think one of the things to remember is that we're kind of living in this new climate. I'm sure you're all aware that social acceptability around mobile is changing all the time. And I see this in my day-to-day life. We see pictures of people taking pictures of inappropriate things, or I know Havas Media Lab just came out with a study a few weeks ago where they interviewed millennials, and 79% of millennials thought it was perfectly acceptable to use their mobile device while sitting on the toilet. Not in the bathroom, actually sitting on the toilet. And so as researchers, this kind of opens up a whole new world for us. We're getting lots of data that we may not have gotten otherwise. There's a lot more opportunities for collecting data, both actively and passively. And I think it's something that's going to change our industry in some really dramatic ways. Another trend that I see a lot of is something that I saw in a TNS report. So TNS, is there anyone from TNS here? You guys put out a really amazing connected life study. And there was some really interesting data in there that said that 50% of evening television viewers are actually doing other activities while they're watching TV. So they're checking their email, they're on their tablet, they're on social media. And that's a really important finding. Even yesterday when I was at the conference, just kind of looking around, you're a perfect example, Guy, right here in front. You've got your laptop and your mobile phone right in front of you. But lots of times we see people doing multiple tasks on multiple devices. And so multi-screen and screen stacking are also something to be aware of while we're in that data collection mode, which is people might start a survey on one device and end on another. So to be able to have a really seamless experience across device, across platform, is super, super important. And then lastly, before I sort of get into an overview of the cross-platform work that we've been doing, there's just a whole new influx of traditional and non-traditional data sources, and that's something we're looking really closely at Decipher, is not just what we can do with primary research data, but what are all these other passive or ancillary forms of data that are coming in. If you're not familiar with Decipher, we're a market research services and software firm. We started out, really just programming online surveys in the business. Then a couple years ago, we came out with a licensed platform now that we use for data collection across a variety of different platforms. And we sort of relaunched it this last January because we really felt like we needed to kind of recreate the space that we're in and come up with this more of a concept of a research hub, which is, hey, not all the data has to be collected on our platform, but we want to have an opportunity to draw in lots of different types of data and also output lots of types of data. And developing a system where we really had this flow all the way through the system was really, really important to us and something that has resonated a lot with a lot of clients that we're working with today. It's also worth bearing, and I know there's someone speaking about wearables later on today. Wearables are projected to be an $8 billion industry by 2018. And so thinking about the mass of data that we have coming in and available to us is something that we really need to be looking at as researchers and realize that the primary research data that we're collecting today is a very, very small piece of what we're going to be working with in the future. So just a little bit about the study background, and I know someone referenced this study yesterday in one of their presentations, which I'm always happy to see our data referenced. But we started back in 2012 sort of looking at what the migration from online to mobile was. And we want to do this for a couple different reasons. One is just so we can sort of track how those patterns were going over time. But secondly, to figure out how we could really address the respondent experience across lots of different types of platforms. So we started out by looking at 80 online surveys in Q3 and Q4 of 2012. Then we added another 42 online surveys to that in Q1 and Q2 of 2013. And then this last year, we really blew it out, and we decided, hey, we're just going to look at all the data coming in through our platform. So we looked at another 20 million survey starts in the first half of 2014 alone. And that gave us a pretty solid base size of 22 million respondents. So we feel like we have some pretty actionable data from that base. And there were three key questions that we asked. First was, does recruitment method have an impact on survey participation from mobile device? Yes, it does. I'm not going to go into that. You can read more about it in the white paper. The second is data quality impacted by mobile? And yeah, there are some differences, as Ryan mentioned this morning. I don't think that differences are necessarily a bad thing. It's a different platform and a different group, and there's ways to work around that. The one thing I did really want to focus on is really how do we design surveys and develop best practices for data integration for cross-platform respondents, because I think this is where sort of the biggest challenge lies when you're collecting data from lots of different sources. How do you work with that in a really seamless way? So there were a couple different takeaways that we had from our cross-platform survey results. The first was that layout was really important, and I know where is he? Edward? Oh, there he is in the back. Edward mentioned this morning that he's not a big fan of grid questions, and I don't like grid questions either. But I think there's a lot of interesting alternatives for grids. We're always looking at break-off rates. What can we do to decrease break-off rates? We do tend to see higher break-off rates around grid questions. But I think it's really taking advantage of the platform and to really look at the layout on multiple devices and figure out what's going to work. And there's lots of alternatives to grid questions. There's card sorts. There's other ways of getting at that data. And so really looking and paying attention to layout is really important. The second is technology and function. And as you know, a PC operates really differently than a tablet or a phone does. And so for us, we really want to be utilizing the technology to the best of our ability. A card sort on a PC can be a touchscreen card sort on a tablet or on a phone. And then we really try to pay attention to what languages we program in. So really trying to stay consistent across all the platforms that we're doing work on. And that usually involves using HTML5 and jQuery are the languages that we've had the most success with. Data integrity between platforms is also really important. So when you're programming something for a mobile device, keep in mind that it needs to look and feel the same on a PC. You want to try to have consistency across all platforms. So for instance, if you're using a slider on a mobile device and radio buttons on a PC, you're not really providing data consistency, and the labeling might be off as well. And that could be sort of challenging from a data integration perspective. And then autosave. Autosave is really important when you're doing cross-platform surveys, and it's something that I feel like it's forgotten a lot of the time, and it's so easy to implement. About 48% of emails these days are actually opened on a mobile device. But what we find is that a lot of particularly panel respondents who are used to taking our surveys open the email, realize what's in store for them, and shut out of it and want to take it on a different device, so either on a tablet or on a PC. If you don't have autosave enabled, they don't really have any way of going back and doing that. And what we find is that when we enable autosave on all of our surveys, that we increase completion rates by over 10%. So autosave is a really important component. And then finally, in terms of that cross-platform planning, that survey planning, testing and more testing is really important. Testing on multiple browsers, multiple devices, looking at readability. Does the question text fit in the screen? Is it really easy to understand what we're asking? Usability, does it fit horizontally and vertically? So if someone turns their device, is it going to work in that new format? Usability, is it working correctly? And then performance is really important. And I know somebody talked about this yesterday about doing research in Africa where it's really sluggish because of the internet connection. So really testing it and making sure that the survey performs the way that you want it to. So once you've got your cross-platform survey data, then the next step for us is we really look at planning for what we call a multi-source data integration. And multi-source can mean lots of things. It could be primary research data, it could be secondary data, it could be passively collected data. There's lots of different types of data streams and data sources available today that we're actively working with. And I'm going to just explain a little bit about how we do it. And we have 3 key principles that we subscribe to at Decipher. Data agnostic, platform agnostic, and what we call ego agnostic. And then the first really just means that we're open to kind of whatever data sources our clients have, and we're going to figure out a way to work with them. It doesn't matter to us if it's coming in on our platform or from someone else's platform. We're regularly working with data from Dimensions, Confirmant, Askia, Kinesis. It doesn't matter to us where it's coming from. What we really want to do is create this really sort of holistic view of what's going on with a brand on our platform. Platform agnostic means that, again, the source of the data doesn't really matter. We're happy to work with anybody, and that also drives into that ego statement, which is, I think, part of it is being open to collaborating and working with lots of different partners and different data sources is super, super important. And here's how it works. The first is that we have an open API architecture, and there's some challenges to an open API architecture. Lots of times I hear people say, we have an open API architecture, and it sounds super simple, and it's actually, anybody who has an open API architecture knows what I'm talking about. It's not like just a plug where you stick the cord into the plug and everything works perfectly. There's usually a little bit of massaging and manipulation that has to go on there. But an open API architecture is really important to us, and was a primary component of us designing this hub, which is how do we get as many sources of data into it as possible, and then how do we make it as easy as possible to get data out of it if there's another reporting platform or custom service that a client has that they need to get data back into. The second is collaboration, and I've touched on this a few times. It's really, really important, particularly in the data reporting side, when you're looking at, really creating more of an experience around a brand instead of just looking at individual research projects in isolation, is really trying to integrate as many other data sources as we can. And this can be challenging because pretty much every brand that we work with has different metrics that they use to track. Some of the big ones that we've integrated are Adobe Analytics, Search Metrics, Pardot, Marketo. We've done some work integrating data from Tableau. So, really having an open mind and being open to having those conversations. Pretty much anybody that reaches out to us and is interested in collaborating or wants to, plug into our system, we're open to having that conversation. So it's a very, very open and collaborative work environment. And then, one of our other key principles for the brands that we're working with is this concept of research centralization. And again, that doesn't mean that all of your data necessarily has to be collected on one platform, but it does mean that all your data ends up in one platform. And there's a couple different reasons why we recommend that strategy. The first is lower data collection costs. And this isn't just for data collection, it's also kind of runs rampant through a lot of the bigger brands and research organizations that we're working with today. There was a study that came out, maybe a year ago, and it said that roughly 20% of research commissioned by the Fortune 1000 is considered to be redundant. So when you look at that in the larger scale of all the research conducted, that's about $6.4 billion in wasted research. And if you work in a smaller company like I do, you might say, well, how could that research be redundant? Doesn't anybody talk to each other? Well, you have lots of big research organizations and lots of different people working on similar studies. So if they can't find the data quickly and easily in one place, or they can't mine through quickly and find the results of a study, then what happens is rather than trying to track it down, which can take a very long time, they just repeat the study. And they might be using a platform like SurveyMonkey. They might be using a platform like ours, or Confirmits, or Dimensions to collect it. But it's not all housed in one place. And so what we see is, particularly for large research organizations where there's a lot of different departments and a lot of different people conducting research, is that we find that having one centralized place where all that research is housed and tagged and meta-tagged is really, really helpful in reducing that redundancy. The second is data visibility and accessibility. And those are two really important components. And when I say data visibility and accessibility, I don't just mean reporting. I mean actually presenting data in a way that's useful to the decision makers internally. And I think that's becoming more and more relevant for researchers, which is a lot of the people utilizing the research internally at brands are marketers. They don't come with a background in statistics. So we're really focused on doing more data visualization, making sure that studies are easy to find, that data is easy to find, that you can mine through projects, not just in isolation, but also longitudinally, is really, really important. And that it's displayed in some visually appealing way that makes it more accessible to the marketing team at large. Consistency in data and design is another big one. We did a pretty large-scale integration with eBay in the last couple of years, and one of the things that we've found is that it's really helped develop questionnaire, standards around how questions are asked, what platforms are utilized, what their email protocols are, and that's all housed in one place. So if, for instance, someone joins the team, they don't have to learn everything from scratch. They can literally go in the platform and find all of their research standards and best practices in place there. And then lastly, and most importantly, is that cross-platform flexibility. And that means that, we can work with any types of surveys from CADI, CAPI. We've got a dialer integration. We feed in survey information from other platforms. Having that cross-platform flexibility and being able to work with not just quantitative data, but qualitative data as well is super, super important. But as I mentioned, there's some challenges, and this is where that cross-platform data integration and kind of looking at all of these aggregate data streams can be more of a challenge. The first is unstructured data sources. And I'm sure for any of you that work with data here and have worked particularly in any marketing platform, you know that a lot of the data that you get out is kind of unstructured. And that can be really, really challenging to work with, particularly when you're trying to look at it in connection with primary research data. The second thing, and I alluded to this earlier, is that an open API doesn't necessarily mean an easy integration. Almost every API integration we do requires some work from our development team. We've got, 14 or 15 different API structures that we work with now. And it seems like almost every month there's a new integration that we're doing that requires some tweak or some adjustment to an existing API. So API doesn't necessarily mean plug and play. It can be quite a bit of work. But the good thing is that if you can provide some structure to the data, generally it can be integrated. And then lastly, and I was having lunch with John Pulliston in London last week, and he was calling this whole concept that we're talking about kind of like the data. He calls it the data unicorn, which is, everybody wants to integrate their data, but nobody really knows how to do it. And I think that's one of the big challenges, is that there has to be really, really clear client objectives, and there has to be an understanding of how all of this data is going to work together. We did a series of meetings with a very large potential client of ours, and spent a lot of time walking through all the different data types that they wanted to integrate, and sort of what was required on their end to sort of define what that data structure was going to look like, and then what the end result ideally would be. And this was the email I got back. It is unclear at this point the mechanism through which we could provide the data to Decipher. And we're still sort of in a holding pattern, trying to figure out how are we going to integrate some of these data sources. So it is an iterative process. It's certainly, it's not a process where people come in and they just know what they want off the bat. It's new not just for us as suppliers, but it's also new for brands and new for clients, and they're still trying to understand as well, sort of how do we integrate all of these data sources into some more meaningful picture for a brand. And the good news is that we're having a lot of success doing it. We're in the middle of a large-scale integration with Eli Lilly. They're launching that this month. If any of you are doing work for Lilly, I'm sure you've heard of some of the work that we're doing there. LinkedIn, Hulu, PayPal, Visa, we've done large-scale integrations there. And so, the idea of sort of having that one centralized research hub, I think, is appealing to a lot of these brands that have traditionally been a little more wide in scale in terms of how their research has been managed. And then I think really the takeaway from my presentation, if you walk away from anything, is just not to be afraid to experiment. I mean, I think when we launched this concept of the hub and started working with clients, we thought, gosh, some of this data integration is going to be really easy. This is going to be a slam dunk. But the truth of the matter is that we do a lot of experimentation. We do a lot of API development, and we're still finding our way in the space. So don't be afraid to ask questions and to really collaborate and turn it into an iterative process with your clients, and because we're all still learning. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristin. Thank you. Have we got any questions from the floor for Kristin? Really pleased that you talked about this today. And despite maybe what you originally thought you were going to talk about or didn't talk about, I'm really glad that you covered this topic. This, I'm sure many of us here will agree, is an area which is highly relevant to us right now. And with where the market is going, technology is going, connecting these different data sources is really exciting. And it's truly a way to be able to leverage that advantage, offer something really unique and powerful. So yeah, really great to hear that you're doing it and see the successes. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything about how this works that would make your life easier, what would it be?
Oh gosh, it'd be great like if an open API was really just a straight API integration. I mean, I don't think there's a magic wand. I mean, I think the most challenging thing is for us, particularly as a research and technology firm, it's tough to be a mind reader and to know exactly what's the most meaningful approach for a particular client in terms of all the data sources that they're working with. And so, I think a lot of what we have to spend our time doing is just really getting to know the brands that we're working with, and then trying to figure out what's that meaningful story that we can create. It would be great if there was an easier way to get to that, but unfortunately, it's just, it's spending a lot of time together.
Good. And just as a show of hands from the audience, how many people here are trying to integrate different data sets together? Quite a number of you. Good. Okay, so hopefully you found that really relevant. Yeah. Just check, no questions. Okay, so please, thank you.